Welcome to the Parable Arrows podcast, where we wrestle with story to seek deeper truth. We believe that engaging with the art of the world can help us discern more of what God, as the true artist, is trying to reveal in the beauty of his story. Join us as we discuss movies, ideas, and practice engaging with art, God's word, our thoughts, and each other.
Archers, what is going on? This is Josh, one of your hosts of the Parable Arrows podcast. I'm joined tonight by Femi. Femi, how are you, my good sir? What is up?
Man, I'll be talking and talking and talking. I am excited for the conversation we're about to have, and also the conversation we just had off camera. Guys, like, these movies, the conversations you bring up when you talk about life, just so rich.
If I had to predict, we'll see by the end of the show, I will probably get teary because this movie hit me kind of at a weird season. We were just talking about it a little bit, but the movie we're going to be discussing today is A Good Person. This is a recent film. You can catch it on Amazon Prime if you are a Prime subscriber. So this film is probably more typical of what more adult viewers that might listen to our show would enjoy having a conversation around. It's more grounded in reality. It's not so much fantasy and action, maybe like some of the other films that we've covered, but we think it's a great option for people who like human-centered stories. So just regular people overcoming real challenges. So because of these types of stories, especially like romantic movies, and that they're set in reality, it opens up a lot of questions for us to ask, okay, have you had someone in your life that faced this thing? What sorts of ways did you handle it? How have you seen maybe someone else go through this? How did they handle it? So it just kind of helps us ground it a little bit more. So this is, again, A Good Person, starring, I think it's, Pugh.
Florence
Pugh and
Morgan Freeman.
Those two together, they're a dynamic duo in this film. And as we launch into this episode, we are going to use what we like to call SMART, which is our breakdown method when we, as a team, engage stories. So that stands for S for summary, M for message, A for audience, R for rethink. So those questions we're going to ask each other to get deeper into our relationships, and theology at the end. So without further ado, let's get into it. All right, so plot spoilers for A Good Person incoming. A Good Person follows Allison, a woman in her mid-20s, engaged to Nathan. On a trip to shop for wedding dresses with her soon-to-be sister-in-law and her sister-in-law's husband, Allison is driving. While Allison is checking maps during the drive, a construction machine backs into traffic. The rest of A Good Person unfolds from this moment as Daniel, the father of the sister-in-law and also the father of Nathan, Allison's fiance, and Allison navigate the tragedy of Nathan's sister and her husband dying in the car accident. Allison goes through addiction to opiates, and because of the accident and having to cope with the pain, and falls into a place where she realizes she needs help. She fights it at first, but relents and goes to her first AA meeting, where, as fate would have it, she meets Daniel, Nathan's father, and the father of Molly, I believe is her name in the movie, who died in the accident. So Daniel is a 10-year sober alcoholic himself, and over time as they go through the movie, they're both kind of dealing with the tension of this death that has happened, that Daniel subtly has been harboring against Allison, but he's trying to be a better person and let her in. And so they begin developing a friendship, and at a critical moment where Daniel, who is raising Molly's daughter, Ryan, he tries to help her through some things that she's dealing with, and Allison comes into the picture to actually encourage and support Ryan. But in a classic teenage moment where she's trying to make things better and fumbles the bag, as the teenagers say, Allison is reunited at a concert with Nathan, her former fiance. Allison has a panic attack. She relapses with drugs, and she and Ryan end up at a seedy party. And Ryan, being a high schooler, is in the midst of a whole bunch of things that she should not be. Daniel freaks out, as does Allison's AA sponsor. They're trying to find them. They find them using some iPhone tracking stuff. And they end up at the party. And Daniel at this point has relapsed as well, is also drunk, has a gun, and is ready to kill an assaulter that is at the party who we have met earlier in the film, who has kind of had a secret romantic entanglement with the daughter, Ryan. Things are slightly de-escalated, but not before Daniel lets Allison have it and tells her the full weight of his pain, that he blames her for his daughter's death, that it was her fault, that she should have been able to stop the car, but because she was on her phone, she was responsible. So after this moment, Allie wakes up. She is at her sponsor's house, and she decides to make a final major decision to go into a more serious rehab clinic. Does so, goes through the program successfully, has kind of a reconciliation with Nathan in the process, and makes it through the program. At the end of the film, Allie's at a piano bar performing some of her music as a musician when she's contacted by Nathan, her former fiance, and she gets the sad news that Daniel, the father, has died. We see her at the wake at her home, where we are reunited with Daniel's model train city, and there is a note and a little figurine of Allison that is supposed to represent her, that is supposed to go into Daniel's idyllic town that he has created. So in his letter, he says a final goodbye, asks for some final things of Allie out of love, and says that he hopes to see her again someday. All right, so Femi, we have already said this is a heavy movie with some heavy themes. What do you think was a message of a good person, or one of the messages?
The message that I took away from the movie was that the healing journey is unpredictable. There are people who have these long fights to get to what we would normally consider on the outside fully stable, and they're navigating life through it. And unfortunately, sometimes for these people who are working their best, what they think is their best on their journey, they have to really hit some type of rock bottom to see the lasting progress they want to see. For Daniel, it seemed to be the estrangement from his adult children, and learning how he could reintegrate into his life, into their lives. For Allie, was being blamed, really finally being confronted about, your actions are the thing that caused my daughter and her husband's death. And we see all these people grieving in different ways. Nathan, Ryan, Daniel, Allie, and when to use the title of the film, A Good Person, the question the film is asking is like, what makes somebody a good person, right? What makes you a good person? Is it that you are able to forgive, that you're trying? Is it that you actually make the final change? It doesn't really answer it, almost like the Good Samaritan. But that idea of the healing journey and what it takes, and the bravery and the struggle, and how hard it is, and what people are wrestling with. We didn't put it at the top, but the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Association Administration has a helpline of 1-800-662-HELP. And it's 1-800-662-HELP. So I don't want to gloss over that as well. If you were struggling with something and this movie has any of those triggers for you, like, please, please, please get help. But I think that healing journey is just very unpredictable, and we should all be aware of that. What about you?
I won't get ahead of myself. I think that one of the things that stood out to me, and how I summarize the message of this film, is life is painfully unpredictable, and how one moment everything can go from amazing to deeply, deeply broken, and that this reality is unfair, but is also our responsibility to deal with. So we very poignantly start the film with Allison and Nathan having the time of their life. It's the engagement party. All their friends are there. They're all laughing and singing and having a great time. And there's just love in the air. And, they're kind of being sweet and romantic in a scene after that. And then the third scene of the entire movie is the car crash. And then the rest of the, hour and a half, 2 hour long film is dealing with that one moment. And so I think, especially from the Christian perspective, it is so hard that this world is so unfair, and that there are so many moments that happen either from our own dumb choices or the dumb choices of other people or whatever, that can cause irreparable damage that then takes a lifetime to deal with very, very slowly. And I think this movie is kind of showing us what it looks like to actually deal with those kinds of problems and those kinds of experiences, and taking responsibility for them, but also being patient with ourselves as we go through it and the ups and downs of the mistake. So with that, Femi, with either of those messages, do you agree, disagree? Do you think they're helpful, unhelpful? What do you think?
Yeah, I think that there are, and in our pre sort of meeting notes, there are people who can just decide to make a change and make it. Some of those people are called like high discipline individuals. If they say they're going to do something, they're going to do it. You're really not going to change them. They just do it. I think there's a book called The Four something, one of those many personality books. And one of the types is somebody who says they're going to do something, they're going to do it. So if they say they're going to go on vacation and there's a 3-hour time difference, they're going to go to bed at their normal time and wake up at their normal time. They're not going to change based off of the time zone. It's just too, like, they're just going to keep it. There's people who, like Daniel, over time make changes. And there's people like Allison who hit rock bottom to make a change. I think that in that idea for both messages, I agree that life is unpredictable. I think that perspective, which we can get into in a little bit, is really important to think about this unpredictability. If life is unpredictable, it means that our expectations about it need to be very, very tempered. We can't say, because I did this, I deserve this, or because I did that, I deserve this. And it's hard to think that there are people who are not doing anything, like specifically wrong, and their house just catches on fire because of a freak storm and a lightning strike or a tree or something like that. There's more to say there, but overall, I think I agree with that part of the message. If the message was about like what it means to be a good person, I don't think the movie really answered it.
Yeah.
I think all the people have some type of redemptive arc, which is good, but it doesn't really define it. So I don't want to say I agree with any type of definition about what is a good person from the movie's perspective.
Definitely.
But I was happy of where those people sort of ended up on their emotional and relational journeys. What about you?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great detail. And I would agree with your caveat that the perspective of how we see life and how we see, especially from our American context, that do X, get Y, like do X plus Y, get Z, like we have we love our formulas. We love our structures and our frameworks of getting things done or making things happen or quote unquote manifesting whatever. And I think there is a shallow wisdom in that, where it is good for us to be planned. And, scripture is even very direct with us that we shouldn't just be flippant with our time and what we do and our energy and our resources and the relationships that we have. But there's also this very like life is so fragile and how things work is so fragile that for us to expect certain things to happen or to believe we are deserving of certain things to happen because we've done the right, quote unquote, the right stuff, can be a very slippery slope. And I will probably talk more about that because I was kind of sharing a personal current state of kind of dealing with that sort of thing. But before we get into that, let's talk about our audience and then we'll do our rethink. So Femi, we've already talked about some heavy topics, even in just kind of giving the summary and the overview of this film. So given our usual 3 categories, either audience with family with kids, friends, and evangelistically to spark convo, who would you kind of say that this movie is for?
2.5-year-olds, specifically 2.5 to
totally
2.75.
Especially like
That's
the whole
like
opiate addiction thing. I think they'll really resonate with that. That's
no,
real.
please understand that we are joking. You shouldn't watch it with your kids.
Sarcasm. Please don't get lost.
If it's not clear, please do not cancel us over that. We do not suggest that this is a movie for kids, but absolutely for friends and to spark conversation. Even specifically the idea that you could watch this movie like in an early evening and have snacks, and if you are a house that consumes alcohol, maybe a few drinks, to talk about the movie afterwards and just sort of like have a movie and chill night one, people, especially after we're in 2024, after the pandemic, if people say they want to hang out after being locked in their house for a year, you get them to hang out, watch a movie, hang out, chill, talk, and you don't know. Somebody might share something about their own family and somebody who's going through something hard. So it's a really good opportunity to share hard things going on with each other, as Josh and I sometimes do, and then evangelistically to spark conversations to really think through how someone might be dealing with their pain in the context of the film and how you might want to be able to pivot that, which is part of what we do with these parable arrows. So
yeah.
What about you?
Yeah, totally agree. Definitely not a movie for the little ones. I think this is a great movie for parents though, especially just because there's a number of parents, there's a number of kind of adult figures acting in this movie, either directly as main characters or even I think of, I can't remember what Allison's AA sponsor's name was, but just seeing her as an example, like I think there's some like really cool, interesting people that are there in those roles. So I think this is a good film for parents, but definitely this is not one to like watch when the kids are walking around kind of thing, just given some of the content. And I would agree with friends and evangelistically. I think this would actually be probably one of the realer movies that you could talk about. And there's even some allusions to like God and church that could be really interesting doorways into a deeper conversation. But I think something that would be important, this was a suggestion I had, is don't just be like, hey, everybody come on over for movie night. We're going to watch this little flick called The Good Person. Like this is a heavy flick. So yeah. I would say prep minds and hearts accordingly and tell them that it's phenomenal and it's really good, but it's really heavy, which is one of the reasons that you want to invite them to talk about it afterwards, is because there's, a lot of like dense stuff that you don't feel like is appropriate to just kind of consume and walk away from. It's, like you want to use it as kind of like a deeper thing. So with that, we're going to demonstrate what that looks like with a couple examples of some questions. So Femi, my first question for you is, setting up kind of the context, there's a moment where Allison is, her mom in a fit of rage with her and where she's at and how she's living has just flushed her last prescription of Oxycontin down the toilet. And so Allison is angry. She meets up with an old friend to try and get a hookup, and friend says no. And she goes to a dive bar in the middle of the afternoon, runs into two guys that she knew from high school. And there's this really intense moment where she asks them basically like, hey, can you help me get some opiates or can I get some drugs? And the guy's like, oh, he's kind of like razzing her about it. And there's this really dark moment where this one guy from high school basically forces her, before he's going to help her find what she needs, he forces her in a really demeaning way to admit, I am a junkie. Like that's kind of the phrase, and there's some expletives thrown in there. So it made me think of this paradigm that we can have when we're admitting things we struggle with in truth, and how there is a way that truth can be shown to us in a way that is shaming. And then there's a way that it can be rooted in honest humility from the other party that's kind of doing it, where it's like, you know what? I love you. I gotta show this to you. And like, we gotta talk about this, or I just need to at least bring this up to you. So at this moment, it seems like Allison is kind of forced into that first one where the truth is being shown to her in a really shaming, like rub your nose in it way. So as the church, or just as in relationships, what are ways we can show people the truth of their shortcomings without maybe drowning them in that shame or making them feel unnecessarily not... Truth is always going to make people feel bad, right? But doing so in a way that the truth itself does that versus us having to pile on, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I don't know if there's something prescriptive that I have as what we can do, but we know that that's the goal. The goal is that as we share the truth, that people don't feel unnecessary shame, unnecessary guilt. We don't want to make it about the person being good or bad, but the actions and their purpose being so separated that they see the problem. Mm-hmm. I think that's one way that I've been told to talk about it, is someone who is drinking too much or someone who is staying out too much, calling them to a higher purpose and be like, I thought this is what you were going to. Like, I thought this is the direction that you were headed and you want to head. And it just feels like this is all detracting from it. It's just completely taking the energy and life away from this beauty that I see. And if you want to talk about it more, we can, but like, can you at least like be honest with me if you see that? Do you see that as a issue? Do you see that as a problem in how you're moving through life? And again, the Socratic method, like using questions to help people relook at it instead of calling them out, going like, you think you're better than me, and now you're coming to me for help, so I'm gonna make you say that you're just like me. I'm gonna like, that's a identity based accusation. Like your identity is wrong, and you need to throw away all of who you are, throw the baby out with the bathwater of your identity to claim that I am of a higher identity than you or whatever. So we have to be really careful as Christians that our identity being rooted in Christ does not mean that we are Jesus.
Yeah.
We're supposed to live like Jesus, and calling people out in a negative way would not be living into that purpose. So we have to highlight that for ourselves. When it comes to my actions with other people, it really depends on the situation, to hear the prompting of the Spirit, to be connected to Scripture and listening to the Spirit, but really calling people to their highest selves, especially if they're admitting wrongdoing. If they're saying, I want to keep doing my problems, can you spot me? I'll be like, I can't. I can't do that. It's against a boundary for me. I really would love to help you otherwise, but I can't do that. And then if they are admitting a problem, I don't want to dig more into the problem if they're admitting it. I want to dig into the feelings around the problem that caused them to admit it a lot of the time. So if somebody was looking at pornography, or somebody is coming back from like a cheating scandal or a lying scandal of some sort, I don't want to focus on the cheating, the lying, or the porn. I want to focus on the like, what's going on internally right now, because that's going to cause them to either go further down those paths if they don't have an ear, right? Versus all the solutions that professionals tell me I've heard or I've seen work. I could come to that, but then I'm looking like a fixer, or I'm looking like an accuser instead of a listener. And I try to make sure that I'm doing that. I really am not great at it. You can ask my wife, but
yeah, I get you.
Other than that, I think those are some things that we can do. Anything you want to add to that of like?
Yeah, I think the calling out how, like, if we go to Scripture and we go to the life of Christ, and there are a number of moments where we even see the religious separation of the unclean and the broken from the religious and the upright. And we have even like the language of like how the Pharisees talked about the people who were doing things wrong. They were right. Those people were doing things wrong, and they should have been held accountable for them. But how they were being held accountable for them was not honoring to God or honoring for their personal restoration. And I think, even just thinking of, church scandals right now, or like I've been kind of loosely following the Mark Driscoll thing at James River Church that happened at the men's conference with the monster truck and stuff, which is the whole thing. But I think in that there's been so much drama, and that's so interesting to me to say that two men of God who are trying to lead other men in relationship to God are causing drama. And to me, if you're trying to restore and you're trying to call someone, specifically even in this instance, which is a shortcoming of someone else, to do so publicly doesn't seem like that's actually about that person's good. It seems like it's about propping yourself up, if that makes sense. And so I think in how we approach in wanting to call someone to a higher life that they either claim that they want, or we would maybe encourage them to want, is it about us? And is there how much of us doing that, and how much in our tone and what we say and the words we choose when we show up, how we show up, is us trying to get one over on them? And how much of it is us just genuinely being like, you as a human are too good for what you are choosing to do, and I want so much better for you. And so I'm going to tell you some hard things that I think you need to hear, but I'm going to do so gently, lovingly, in a way that does not make me look or feel better than you. And I think that's a very fine line sometimes. Oh, yeah. And I think, especially when we have biblical instruction on how to deal with those conflicts, I think people can get a little out of hand sometimes with how that's interpreted. But that's my own thought. Anything else on that? You looked like you had a thought, so I want to give you space in case you had something else. You're good.
No, I think we're good for the next one. I think we are.
Okay.
I don't want to
So-
be the person who says no and then is like, oh, but blah, 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 blah,
Okay,
blah.
but before, yeah, I got you. I got you. So second question, kind of going again back to Jesus and one of the parables that he told. There's this moment where Allison and Daniel are sitting down, they're having brunch, and Allison has this quote where she basically says, I need to confess something. I don't know if I know how to do this. I don't know how to start all over and relive my life. Can I tell you a secret? I don't know if I have the will to do this. And, Daniel just kind of really quickly, and I think he's even off screen when he says this, and he's like, well, it takes work, like it's hard. And it made me think of the analogy that Jesus gives to following him, and that it's equated to being a builder who wants to build a building, and you get all excited and you buy all the materials and you start building and you get the skeleton and all this stuff and you put up all these beams, and then you're like, frick, this is too hard. I don't want to do this anymore. And then you walk away. And what ends up happening is people look at the scaffolds and the unfinished product and they're like, what an idiot. Like, that's their reaction. That's literally like,
Yeah.
Jesus is like, everyone's going to look at this person as a fool, that they didn't count the cost of what it would take to go through this journey. And we see Allison, she goes through this journey. There's some ups and downs. And I think we see the messiness of how much seeing to grow and to become healthy and whole costs us. But something I was thinking about is how, like, in church, are we upfront enough as Christians with how really hard it is to follow Christ and all that we do? And then what is the consequence of making discipleship with Christ too easy? And how do we navigate that?
As you probably heard mid-question, no, we do not. Because I'm going to hopefully make this pretty short. Once a lot of people became Christians and they built these communities, and they had these communities where they were supposed to build for like feudal systems, and there's kings, and then there's overthrowing of the king and understanding liberty, and we get all this stuff. Let's fast forward to like early 1900s of like what family's supposed to look like and all these other things. Living in a Judeo-Christian based world meant that if you were going to church in America in the 1900s and your grandparents went to church or founded churches, they were also sort of the building blocks of the community, and they couldn't really get over on people because it wouldn't be good for business, right? They couldn't make these huge, massive corporations. So people were like really in these communal environments, and it was good for you to go to church. If you came in from a different country or a different color or a different religion, you didn't really have this success. So country clubs had a lot of things where if you were not white Christian male, at least in name, that you couldn't get certain access to things. And so we have these like classifications, blah, 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 a bunch of inequality. Don't want to gloss over it, but trying to speed up.
Yeah.
So now we have these benefits that are ingrained in being a part of a Christian community. You have people who will potentially support you or help you in the poverty simulation games that run at nonprofits all over the country. Some of the things like, do you go to church and get free resources because churches are supposed to give free resources? It's sort of just plugged into people's expectations about your family and your life and all this other stuff. And Christianity, therefore, has weakened its own position because it's become seen like as a social thing, an optional thing, not a belief system really, but a political thing. For a lot of people, it probably is, and not a deep-seated moment of conversion, like faith thing anymore. And so we don't, when life doesn't look like it's supposed to look like as a Christian, really understand how to deal with it. So we don't tell people what to do when you have your families and friends abandon you. We don't really have a Christian playbook for that. We just say, be strong. We don't have a Christian playbook for really losing your job because you were honest about something and they didn't like it. Or they didn't care enough about you to honor your integrity. We don't have a really good playbook for standing up for something in your kid's school and having everybody think you're a bigot. Other than like, again, be strong, be angry, be upset as a response. And so we don't tell people how hard it really is to be Christ-like, to like take a cat of nine tails and crucifixion type level punishment undeserved. And what that looks like. I know I am a straight Christian male in the Midwest of America. I have a nice house, condo. I'm married. I get to like do some stuff I want. I have some extra income coming in from tax refunds. Like I'm living a pretty decent middle class life right now. If it all got stripped away, that's what I believe God can do. But if I'm going up from this 1900s hard work pays off type mentality and not all the negatives that can happen, then I'm not ready when the negative things happen to respond in faith, which a lot of the Psalms are David going through that down spiral and coming back up. So that's a long answer, but we don't tell people it's much harder than the fact that you're going to have a new friends, a new community, and a new church, or that you're going to make different decisions that will pay off over time. Your life could be really, really sucky, especially if you're a missionary, especially if you're in a prison camp, especially like we talk about that context so much in a Western frame, not in a Middle Eastern frame or a desert African frame or an Eastern European post-Christian frame of what it's like to really follow Jesus in those hard environments where there's not the community and there's not the support and there's not the social contract. So do not be that builder who is building without calculating all your materials, time, and effort if you really think that house is worth it, because that's a weak why and it's not going to sustain you. Okay, that was way too long, but
no, that was great. I only have one thing I was going to add into that as you were sharing, and that was the idea that I think a consequence of what can happen when we make being a Christian too easy is, to call back to the film, is Allie like says, and I think this is such a fascinating phrase to apply to becoming a Christian or to decide to follow Christ, is it's starting all over. And I think like if we were to frame up the Christian life, I mean, like that's literally what Jesus said himself is, you are reborn. Like this is a new start. But I think we haven't really explained how deep that phrase goes and how painful that phrase is. That means you have to, like, if I were to think of like, okay, as a 29-year-old, if Gloria hears this, she's going to give me flack about it because I'm not 30 yet. But, as a 29-year-old, if I were to say I was born again Christian today, what does that look like for me to be an infant all over again? To have to engage the world differently, to have to take in stimuli and to make decisions differently, to have to like eat differently, to like go to, everything is different. And I have to engage the world almost as if it's a completely new place. And I think when we just make it like, oh, like, no, you get the Jesus button now and you're in. Okay. But like my house, I just told my boss that there's a guy who's been siphoning money and that actually ends up being his close friend. And so I get fired because of office politics. But I from what I understand, Jesus wanted me to do that. So like, why did this happen? Well, he must not be real then, because if I did something good, I'm supposed to be rewarded. Like we get into all this like weird fuff then of like,
or people who do it for the benefits.
Yeah. Do it. Yeah.
If I do it, there's a lot of single girls here.
Yeah.
Let me join a church. Okay. Like this is pretty much okay with me. That's cool. Like I can deal with this. That life is sort of like what my parents did. We can do that. We can raise our kids here. It'll be fine. It's not going to change who I am. I'm a pretty nice person. I'm a good person. Yeah. Like we don't talk about the cost in a way that people really start to play with that in their imagination for preparation.
Yeah.
And some people do it too much where like every single Christian is on the front lines of about to being persecuted. It's like, no, we're not. But we should all imagine like we are going to revitalize our just basic habits of prayer and reading our Bible, attending church, caring for other people, taking rest, like not killing ourselves for money, all this other stuff that we need to make sure we're doing because it is a place where we could be persecuted one day. It better be solid. It can't be all the stuff that I can consume. Yeah. It needs to be all the stuff that I can also create and hold and forms me and changes me and shapes me outside of my parents' house, outside of, an argument with my wife or an argument with my kids. Like an argument with my boss, for goodness sake, like I am held, right? In the arms of a loving father who is just, but who in his justice is completely sovereign and will remember everything. So like,
Yeah.
all that stuff, I could go on and on and on, but
Yeah,
we do not
totally.
show the cost enough, and there are consequences.
Yeah. No, I think so. This kind of connects to our third question. So we have another scene in the AA meeting later in the film where Allie actually gives more of a deep confession of like what happened in the events, and Daniel's actually there and like listening to all this. And so there's this, it's a really intense scene, and a phrase that has radically shifted my life and my ability to deal with the uglier parts of myself, whether those are things I've like protected and feed, or if they're things like we were talking earlier, those deeper subconscious wounds that are just kind of pop up here or there and just kind of wreak havoc. But the power to tell the truth, and the truth setting us free. And usually it's like, oh, so how do we tell ourselves the truth? But that's not the question I want to ask. Instead, in our culture that loves curated lives of fake beauty and wealth and appearances of happiness, how is our unwillingness to tell the truth of how life is or how life functions, how is that hurting us and doing major damage to our souls or to our relationships or to our society?
So there's a huge radical ownership movement. It's a very sort of like men-centered movement of like, don't be a little, whiny boy anymore. Grow up and be a man. That's how it's centered. There's some of the same veins in some type of entrepreneurship circles, but like, own everything. You're the reason you're not doing. Everything is your fault. If you don't like it, it's your fault. I struggle with that. Although Daniel has the tattoo of Amor Fati, of love your fate. That could be a lazy thing to do, to just be like, whatever happens to me happens. And saying that everything is under my control is also not 100% true. Allie's trying the entire movie. It's just she has to hit like rock bottom beforehand. So I think that our unwillingness to tell the truth of how much like we're hurting, like, and how it's hurting us, is without us telling people the truth about how much really is their fault, like how much control and agency they really have. We remove power, and we increase how much blame is going around. We blame other people for things. We say that things happen to us, or things are not happening to us, versus I am not doing the thing to garner the response that I want. Or I have not even assessed if I want to truly do the thing to garner the response I want, and if that will actually fix the emotional pain I feel. So we're not being honest with that. And so therefore there are people who, and I really feel sorry for any like woman the age of like 6 to 36, of all the judgment that you can feel in trying to understand like where your value is. And it just really, really sucks that we have like some people who feel like their body being shown for pictures and videos and used to make money is okay, because it just doesn't matter. Like,
and that's power, or like the weird that's like the way to like have control in a way,
right? And it just hurts me because it's not true. Like, can they do it like to make money? Sure, but it's just not true to like who they're supposed to be, or calling them up to their highest things and purposes. So that's the thing of the blame and the fault finding, right? We put blame in the wrong hands. The other thing with radical ownership is we can tell everybody it's all their fault, but we also have to let them know that they're in a system that doesn't reward them one-to-one. Entrepreneurs who are like, you just got to work really hard. Yeah, but that percentage of how much you work, 1 success, 2 successes for every 400, 500, 600 attempts. Are you saying the other 498 weren't worth it? Like, I didn't pick the right 200 and have a higher percentage chance, like, is it, well, you're going to get better. You're going to get better if you do 500, like, anyway. And so the benefit is you get those 2 and you get 5, like the 498 practices. And I'm like, yeah, but like, that's not what people are asking for. Mm-hmm. People are not asking for what's going to make me better over time. People want to be better now. To say that like hard work's going to pay off is like, yeah, hard work always pays off, but it's not on the time horizon that people are looking for it.
Well, so, as you're saying that, there was just like a gear that clicked where I was like, holy crap, that's literally the same strategy that Christian church circles are doing. Like, if we look at entrepreneurship, if I can sell you this thing of like this life that you want and make it sound like it's easy and you just do the right things, like that's worldly religion in a way.
Oh yeah.
It's the exact same thing as like I'm only adding more clarification so people don't get like weird on me, but like Christian religion versus Christian faith and lifestyle and belief. You know, Christian religion is, well, you just do the right things, you go to the right events, you serve in the right ways, and bada boom.
Over time.
It should happen. And then people like go through hard things and they're like, well, why didn't my soul hold up when this hard thing happened? And it's like, oh, well, it must be because of XYZ spiritual things that you didn't do. Or like with the entrepreneurship example. Well, why didn't these successes happen? Oh, well, it's because you don't have enough micronutrients in your system, and you don't sleep at optimal hours and get your 15 minutes of sunshine at the, you know, and it's like all this weird nonsense that,
or
it's
you didn't
like,
wake up at 4 a.m. and work harder. It's like,
right.
well, there is a huge honesty to saying you have a lot more control, as we believe as Christians, created in the image of God. You have a lot more control than you think. You have a lot more agency than you think. You are not just a victim of everything that happens to you. But things do happen to you. How do you own your response?
Mm-hmm.
Right? And that's getting into like, is there a version of Christian sort of stoicism? But there's also like, is there a Christian love of life too?
Mm-hmm.
So without telling the truth about, sometimes a bad joke from a 3-year-old is going to be the highlight of your day on a tough day. Sometimes the worst part of your day is going to be that one kid said something to you and you weren't expecting it, and it just came out of the blue, and you'll just sit on it the rest of your day. There are going to be days like that. There's going to be days that are just a grind. And there are going to be days where the happiest thing seems like the smallest, most insignificant thing. But we're not telling people that is life. That is what farmers deal with when they're complaining with us city slickers. Like, of us saying our days are hard, when they're like, I work 7 days a week all the time so you can get your $2 loaf of bread. Like, give me a break on your life is hard. Like, my work is hard. Hundreds of thousands of dollars, not making money. People don't want to take my job after I'm gone. Don't know if I'm going to be able to retire. It's that type of level of dishonesty of, oh, everybody can have this idyllic little, 2-acre hobby farm and a nice house. Like, we're lying to people, and it's causing people to think that the problems are caused by other people and other people not respecting their boundaries, versus, are their boundaries even in a direction that can be healed?
Mm-hmm.
Like, people going, oh, everything happened to me. Like, did you just leave? Could you just leave? Or leaving before you can go, can you fix something?
Mm-hmm.
Like, well, I didn't actually make the mess, so I'm not going to clean it up. Yeah, but you live here too.
Mm-hmm.
So I could go on and on about that. But not telling the truth, honestly, causes so much damage with the healing conversations and the time that we take. So,
yeah, no, I think, again, just expanding what that means for us to tell the truth so that the truth will set us free. If we tell the truth of how life is, I think it makes those moments, like, I think of even, the whole point of like the AA thing being like, hi, I'm so-and-so and I am this, is it's not a shame thing. It's like, because if I can say that that's true, then I can own that there are things that are coming out of me that are making me do those things, and I can deal with them. If I say that it's true, like I was giving the personal example before our call, that I struggle with the fantastical fantasy imagined version of what I wish my dream life was, that is more akin to like a Disney movie than it is the real life of a 29-year-old. I have to deal with that, and I have to deal with the discomforts and the emotions and the things that come up that make me go to that, versus if I'm just like, well, but no, like I should have that thing, and people keep telling me that I should have that thing, and so like, well, I'll just do all the things that they keep telling me to do to get those things, and that very subtle lie is going to wreak more havoc than me just like dealing with the reality of things, which is a very interesting segue into our last question, which is Daniel's letter. So at the very end of the movie, this whole film is sandwiched between this image of Daniel's fake town train station kind of thing, and he in a scene in the movie is explaining how it is his version of the world that he wish was. So for example, he tells the story of him coming home from the war in Vietnam and his dad picking him up from the train. But his dad didn't do that. His dad was home drunk on the lawn, passed out, being buried in the snow as it was snowing. And so he creates his own little Eden, because he's like, so much of my life is out of my control. This just gives me the peace to feel like I am in control. And again, instead of us focusing a question around, how do we let go of control and stuff like that, I think what is beautiful but maybe misguided in Daniel's expression of that pain of like not having control and like there being something wrong is what C.S. Lewis called like a longing for a different world. Like there is a world that should be. And so for us as believers, what might it look like for us to spend more time meditating on the world that God imagined, and how might that transform our lives? To imagine a world without pain, imagine a world without the suffering that we are in, imagine the hope of like what was intended. What was this supposed to be?
On one side of, I'm going to stick on the side that you asked. On the one side of, if we imagine the world like that, we'd be like, man, this place is really messed up. It can make us super depressed.
Yeah.
On the other side, which I think you're also sort of asking, that's not the way that it was worded, about the hope that we have, and what is promised, I think we'd be so much less afraid. I worry about the next 30, 40 years of my life, if I live that long, like way more than I'm excited for what is absolutely assured me is promise. And I live probably trying to balance out that fear of what the next 30, 40 years of my life are going to look like way more than I should, compared to treating people like I believe the promises that God has presented me. And helping them to see, yes, this world is exactly as broken as you think, and more. It's so much more broken than you think, from what he imagined. But even more than me being able to tell you how good it's going to be, imagine everything bad becoming untrue. Just imagine everything bad becoming untrue. That's how amazing what is promised to us is. Now, is the fact that your boss won't give you their promotion really going to affect you tomorrow? What? No.
Mm-hmm.
I don't give a flip.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't care. Oh, my church doesn't sing the worship songs I like. That might mean they're heretics. Ugh. I don't really want to have this argument because I don't know if it's worth it. Maybe you should have the argument because you know that although it's uncomfortable, the hope that you have, both of you have, hopefully, is much greater than the discomfort.
Mm-hmm.
The quitting a job is much greater, like, of an issue if there is not an eternal hope. This life and the decisions we make from God's perspective. Oh man, we got to do Prince of Egypt sometime. I got to remember that.
Add it to the list.
But Prince of Egypt, like, we have to look at our life through heaven's eyes. We are but blips in this landscape. And we are so scared of all the things happening in our blip. Yet the God who gave us life is saying, like, I promise you something much better. Just trust me. And we just struggle and struggle and struggle to trust him. You know, if we imagined it, it might make us depressed, but hopefully it would make us see the world as messed up as it is and why we need a savior. And that could transform our lives, because if we start to see the savior for what he actually did, we will live with that hope, and that will change how we face every situation in our life, good or bad.
Yeah. I think that's a great awareness of the dual sides of that coin, because for me, speaking specifically artistically, I tend to really dwell in the first side, the bad side, where I'm like, oh, there's so much messed up, and it's, it's a lot of like ruminating, but then there's those moments where it's like, yeah, but like, imagine if people did this thing. Imagine if people really got around how to like love and like build up others. Imagine if people were more selfless. And then there's this almost this excitement where it's like, why is everyone not like going crazy to like make this happen right now? And but again, it's the truth that both of those things are the reality. It's not suffocating the bad stuff to ignore it because it's uncomfortable, and it's not ignoring the good stuff because the bad is so overwhelming and so all encompassing. It's holding both and remembering that the bad and the things that are broken should remind us, like you said, of our need for a savior, and the joy of the promise should remind us of the glory and the joy that will be experienced in the process of following that savior we choose, in reminder of the bad. So, yeah, man. Any last thoughts on that before we jump to our last section of theology?
Just the amor fati part.
Yeah.
Of like the love your fate. For all our audience, please talk about that if you're going to watch the movie. Talk about it with the people and understand, like, it's a dangerous concept to have either a YOLO type of life or everything is planned and I just got to deal with it life. Daniel sort of enters into all this stuff is bad stuff is happening to me. You know, you being in my life and taking my son away and killing my daughter and impacting my granddaughter. Like, what the get out of my life? I don't like you, but I have to live with you. And I was trying to do it a good way. And like, I'm a good person and I'm trying to love my fate instead of, you know, like, what control do we have? So just be careful and like around this idea of fate and our expectations. Our expectations make things way worse than they are sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
Talk about that. Like, we're not going to talk about it right now, but talk about how do your expectations sometimes make things that are not as bad way, 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 way worse.
Cool.
Let's get into theology.
All right, so we always close out with theology because who was our pastor who said live in many good books or explore many good books.
Spurgeon.
Charles Spurgeon. Live in or explore many good books, but live in the Bible. So that's kind of our ethos and why we always end with scriptures, because ultimately we want to make sure that our lives are not guided by the stories of our culture, even though there is insightful things from them for us to use to reflect and to engage with others. We want to make sure that we are grounding and ordering our lives after the scriptures. So here are a couple Bible passages or things to check out in relation to this movie to just kind of dive a little bit deeper. So the first one is the Book of Lamentations. So with a book like that, sometimes there are those like one-off verses that can be really powerful that you read it and you're like, wow, that's like a fridge verse. You know, we're just going to put that out there out of context because it just resonates. But the entirety of Lamentations is literally like grieving, like what is wrong and like just being sad that things aren't the way they are. So that is a great book to check out to just see, you know, like in wrestling with the themes of this movie of brokenness, how God encourages us with that. Second, if you just read the Bible in general, but through specifically a lens of God's intentional world and what he wanted for people versus the broken one that either people caused or that was formed, and how we are responsible and how he wants us to be responsible for helping participate in fixing it. That can just be, you know, like one of those pairs of glasses that you wear whenever you're engaging scripture of like, what did God intend in this moment, or what might he have intended in this moment, and how our human desires or sin or the powers and principalities getting in the way of that, and what might have looked like for people to have responded to this differently. And then the last one for me before I pass the mic to Femi to give some verses is just the story of Joseph. So like I said for myself at the beginning, one of my messages was that life is unpredictable and unfair, and yet we have to be the ones to deal with that. And so there are a lot of things that Joseph and his story experiences at the hands of his brothers that are unfair and unjust, but at no point did he, as we read the story, put the blame on them. He took ownership of the situations he was in, and it was hard. And I'm sure that there were a lot of probably like angry nights and tearful moments, but he still fought through. And because of that, God used him mightily in the land of Egypt because of his lifetime. So with that, Femi, what are some of the verses that you want to highlight?
The first ones I'll highlight are Job 38:4. If you're a person who struggles with depression a lot, this might not be the verse for you, but it really helps me when I'm feeling depressive. Job is saying, like, you know, I did all these things, and God responds with like, where were you when I formed the foundations of the earth? Tell me if you understand. He just asks for chapters to Job of, do you actually see all these things that you think you can complain about? And that goes into Psalm 90, where the psalmist, I think it's a prayer of Moses. The psalmist is just about God's power. It just talks about God's power. In verse 9, for all our days pass away under your wrath. We bring our years to an end like a sigh. The years of our enemies are long, yet their span is toil and trouble. They're soon gone. Who considers the power of your anger and your wrath according to the fear of you? It's 9 through 11. It's just, again, a poem of humility, because that same God of that power in Psalm 121 is where our help comes from. All three of these are not about our expectations being valid, but how we need to continue to reform our expectations. Not our responsibilities or what God calls us to, but our expectations of what they're going to get us. They are good, but we're bound by time, and that's hard. And then Matthew 18, 21 to 35, about forgiveness and the parable of the unforgiving servant, and just remembering how hard Daniel was working to try to forgive and worked again, try to forgive. Forgiveness is huge, and we could have just about this theme. This is the theme of the movie that my wife picked up on. Love you. And she was just absolutely honest about the fact that forgiveness so much so helps people to heal. Nathan, Ryan, Daniel, Allie's mom, Allie's sponsor, all had to forgive her enough for her to realize, like, oh, these people who care and that I'm hurting. When she got to her rock bottom, she wanted to change for. So that's another thing about just remembering how much you've been forgiven, especially if you're a believer, in your sin before you start trying to hold people up against sin. Not even against you, but just remembering that God's the one who holds all of that in his hands, and he forgave you, so he can forgive them and you can forgive them. And you could preach a sermon about that. So those are the things that this movie made me think of.
Yeah. Awesome. Cool. We're going to close out. So thanks for listening to episode 36 of the Parable Arrows podcast. Just to throw out a small highlight, because of the timing of when we're recording this, which is at the end of April, this may not come out originally in April before our Madison presentation or Signal in the Noise. But in case it does, please be sure to check it out if you are in the area. We will be at High Point Church. In addition, we will have recordings going up ideally of our Milwaukee one that we did at Eastbrook Church and our High Point one. So if you aren't able to attend, we totally get it. This is kind of our first run at this. So we're excited to kind of share the presentation and just some of our thoughts and encouragements for the body of Christ as we navigate media in our modern landscape and use it as a tool to love and build deeper relationships. So be on the lookout for that. You can follow us on Instagram, TikTok, which may be dying, so I won't do much episode in that. But YouTube and TikTok YouTube and Instagram are the two best places to find our content. ParableArrows.com is also another place. So those are the places to check out and look for that. Otherwise, any other final announcements from you, Femi, before you close us out with your tagline?
Yeah, thanks everybody. Appreciate it. This episode was produced by Josh Erickson, Josh Cook, and Femi Shokoya, and edited by Josh Erickson. Our social media producer is Colton Mefford. We are currently self-supported. You can check out short stories, merch, and highlighted creators at parablearrows.com. You can also find us on Instagram and TikTok at Parable Arrows or support us on Patreon. Thank you for listening to the Parable Arrows podcast. Think, move in faithfulness, and trust God. Pull back, aim high, let it fly.